Good afternoon and welcome to the second seminar of Engaging India at Almedalen. Yesterday, at the opening seminar, we explored how India and Sweden can collaborate and co-think on sustainability-driven research and innovation, as well as industry partnerships. We also spoke about digital transformation and digital public goods and how they help the acceleration of attaining sustainable development goals across the world. Today, we move to energy transition. To achieve climate neutrality requires cooperation in the fields of clean energy and clean energy research, as well as different areas of industry to industry, government to industry, academia to industry, and academia to government partnerships. This also includes that we need to ensure adequate and affordable energy access. That is crucial as well. So what are the pathways for a collaborative energy transition, and how can Sweden and India collaborate and learn from each other? And those are the questions that we will be exploring today at Seminar 2 of Engaging India at Almedalen. And with this, I'd like to begin by inviting India's ambassador to Sweden and Latvia, His Excellency Tanmay Lal, to say a few words, please. Welcome, Ambassador.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Rupali, for organizing this and also for inviting me here. You have a very distinguished panel on energy today. Energy, of course, is crucial to all human activity, and it is at the core of the sustainability problem that we are discussing. I would just try to point out a little bit of context, broader context, because we have much better experts here who would explain the collaboration aspect. When we talk about energy, we have to look at both the access, which, for example, a country like India has still a long way to go to provide affordable, clean energy access, and to remove its import dependence. Sweden is fortunate because Sweden is largely energy independent. Whereas in India's case, the government has now aimed to achieve energy independence in the 100th year of our independence, which is in 2047. India is among the largest and fastest growing economies, so the energy requirement is huge, especially in the context of the imports. At the same time, the government is trying to see how the energy intensity of this growth can be reduced. We have massive ongoing actions on rural electrification, solar power, and so on. Further, very ambitious targets have been set at the COP26. These are, for example, by the end of this decade, India aims to achieve 500 gigawatt of non-fossil fuel energy, half of the total energy from renewables, a reduction of 1 billion tons of carbon emissions by that from the business as usual scenario, and reduction of energy intensity by 45% from the 2005 levels, and also 1 million ton of hydrogen annually, the production. A lot of work is going on e-mobility. LEDs, 400 million units have been distributed in the last 4 or 5 years. 40 million new LPG connections have been installed. So all this ambitious targets means that there is huge potential for collaboration in clean energy sector. And that's where the discussion here today will be very, very interesting. Yesterday, we had spoken briefly about Lead IT, the Solar Alliance. So those are some of the international initiatives where India and Sweden are involved actively. So I now look forward to listening to the expert panel.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Thanks a lot. I think you've set the stage in many ways of what our discussion is going to be today, so thank you for that. So energy is crucial for our daily lives, to run our homes, to power our schools, to power our streets, to facilitate us to go and work. Energy is crucial to our industry, to our economies, to our trade, and to our international trade as well, which is equally crucial. We now know that business as usual and our dependencies on fossil fuels is not sustainable. The commitment to change is evident in the fact that 196 parties are now signatories to the Paris Agreement on climate change, with an aim to limit global warming to 2 degrees pre-industrial level. But the challenge to shift to renewable and green energy is the most complicated challenge facing the world today. Energy is needed for inclusive development, for example. It's needed to meet other sustainability development goals, like poverty alleviation, as well as decent economic growth. Different nations and regions are at different points in the energy transition path. So the big question, of course, is then, where do we move from here? How do we move from here? And how do we take everyone along? Big questions, because these require a lot of minds like y'all to come and share your experiences and expertise and engage with each other. And that's why, to answer these questions, I'm joined by industry experts, academia, and researchers from India and Sweden. It's my pleasure to, of course, welcome first our Indian guests. I hope they can see me somewhere there, yeah. We have with us Mr. Shivanand Nimbargi. He's the co-chair of FICCI Renewable Energy's CEO Council. The FICCI stands for the Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He's also the managing director and CEO of Ayana Renewable Power. Mr. Nimbargi was till recently the managing director and the CEO of L&T Metro Rail. So this is one of the largest metro railway projects in India. It's also one of the largest public-private partnership projects in India. And prior to that, he was associated with the renewable energy company Green Infra as its CEO and managing director, as well as Alstom, which is a French power equipment major. Also, to be joining us very shortly is Anirban Ghosh, the Chief Sustainability Officer at the $20 billion Mahindra Group. Under his leadership, Mahindra has developed an award-winning sustainability framework to become the first to have a certified carbon-neutral factory in India, and has also enabled 21 locations to become zero waste to landfill. We also have with us 3 very special guests here in Visby. I'm joined by Tor Broström, professor at Uppsala University. Welcome, Tor. Professor Tor Broström is an energy efficiency expert, especially in built environments, climate adaptation, and indoor climate, and has a special focus on culturally and historically valuable buildings. So nice to have you here. I'm also joined by Björn Samuelsson, lecturer at Uppsala University, and till recently with the Luleå University of Technology. Björn specializes in green hydrogen research and has also deep experience in supply chain and logistics, having worked previously in the industry. He's currently in a very, very interesting project on green hydrogen for transportation with Region Gotland for the ferry services on the island. And we're also joined by Dr. Swaminathan Ramanathan, lecturer and researcher at Uppsala University and director specializing in strategy, sustainability, and ESG at Deloitte. Swaminathan works at the intersections of academia and industry on on ESG, sustainability, future urbanities, and society. He is also the co-organizer of Engaging India at Almedalen. So welcome, all of you. For those who don't know me, my name is Rupali Mehra. I'm one of the co-organizers of Engaging India at Almedalen. Oh, we can keep this mic here now. So I'd like to welcome all the speakers, and I would like to start, let's head to India first. So I would like to start with Mr. Nimbargi. I'm not sure if you can see us, Mr. Nimbargi, but if I hope you can hear us clearly. Could you please share with us India's present location on the journey map towards net zero and the initiatives that are being taken towards energy transition?
Yeah, thanks, Rupali. I hope I'm visible and audible.
Yes, yes, Mr. Nimbarge.
Yeah, thank you, Rupali. So, I think India is one of those countries in the world where, under the leadership of our Prime Minister, has taken a huge step in terms of moving, energy transition and having set a clear target of net zero by 2070. So, given that context, there has been huge policy and regulatory impetus given by the government. As we speak today, our RE capacity has exceeded 150 gigawatts. Out of that, roughly is about 50 gigawatts of hydro capacity, and balance is a mix of solar and wind. And we have approximately another 30 gigawatt of projects which are under various stages of execution. As an intermediate target for RE capacity, we have a target of 500 gigawatts by 2030, and that is, something which we feel is achievable. And government is constantly taking feedbacks in terms of the concerns or issues and constantly addressing through industry interaction to be able to take steps in those direction. So clearly, there is a very clear roadmap as far as the RE capacity, addition is concerned. Now, moving on to energy transition and net zero, targets. So, in addition to this, country has embarked on an ambitious program of promoting green hydrogen as an energy alternative. To that effect, I think country has formulated green hydrogen policy and are working in terms of how do we really get the acceleration of green hydrogen projects. To that effect, there are considerations being made on how do we actually get the market created. So even in the case of solar that we could look, initially when the prices were high, the tariffs were high, the government provided support to the industry in the form of viable gap funding, which helped to create the demand. So similar kind of policies are expected. We should, continue to fuel the growth there. So that is, something which is under the work. In addition to that, there is work going on, in terms of green ammonia, which could potentially be utilized for exports. And hopefully, once the market gets created for green hydrogen, country also could look at, exporting this in addition to meeting its own energy needs. So, given all this, in addition to this, there are a lot of other forward-looking, policies and regulatory aspects that are being thought about. We are actually awaiting for an Electricity Act amendment to take place, which should be aimed at creating the demand in this sector because of higher penalties on RPO obligation, renewable power obligations, and enhancing the viability by improving the renewable energy certificates, and also measures to take, which is one of the major concern today is about the financial health of the distribution companies. So they are going to take certain steps under this Electricity Act amendment so that financial health of the distribution companies is sustainable, and trying to isolate the subsidies through a direct benefit system. So those are the other steps which are taking. In addition to this, one of the other major steps that the government is taking, in fact, recently, if you would have noted in the recent FICCI event that we organized, there the Honorable Minister said that there is going to be a huge focus in terms of getting the transmission and distribution network, spread out, because the more and more RE capacity is possible only if the transmission networks are established. So there is a holistic plan in terms of getting to the targets that have been set, and all the policies and the connected ministries are working very closely in different areas. And we are hopeful, we should see huge progress in this direction. And as an intermediate target of achieving 500 gigawatt by 2030 is something that we think is achievable. Thank you.
So 500 gigawatts by 2030, and that, of course, is it's a good ambition. It's a challenge as well, and at a policy level, a lot clearly is being done at the government level, and of course with the support of the industry and research. But Swami, if I can come to you on this and pick up some of those threads, when we are talking about energy transition must also prioritize an equitable and affordable energy access for all to meet development objectives, for example. To this effect, there are several interesting parallel clean technologies, which was just referred to. We were talking about hydrogen, we're talking about distribution ways, the solar, etc. My question to you is twofold. One, how is the energy basket changing in India when we kind of look at what we have right now vis-a-vis what we are aiming for? And from your vantage point of having industry and sort of research experience both in India and Sweden, if you could explain in layman terms of how can we kind of prioritize equitability and affordable energy access to meet economic development objectives? So it's a complicated question, but I hope you can simplify it for us.
Yeah, so let me make an effort. So one way of looking at the energy question is to also look at it from a system perspective. So there are several pieces already in motion as far as the system is concerned. So when you look at renewable energy, some of the potential that Mr. Nimbarke was talking about, or some of the key activities that the ambassador in his keynote address was talking about in the first session yesterday, in terms of decarbonization, hard-to-abate sectors. So those pieces are already moving. So from a technology perspective, it is not a question of if, but more a question of when. And if one has to go ahead and address that question from the position of when does it happen, then it's a question of how do you accelerate, how do you amplify it, what are the key technologies that you need to back up, how do you create a diversity of technological solutions that are clean energy focused, for instance, that are renewable in the true sense of the term, and so on and so forth. So it's almost like a risk matrix that you will have to develop from a systemic perspective, saying that what are the technologies that need to be developed. And also at the same time, the risk matrix has to go ahead and take into account that some of these technologies will fail. So how do you sort of build in a systemic approach to go ahead and handle failures, and also create a systemic buffer for the system to go ahead and take in failures? So there I would sort of take down one more drill down question before going on to the question of how do we look at equity and access and socioeconomic development.
Sure.
Is also to take a look at it in terms of the fact that which are the technologies that are promising, one, but also look at technologies that are end-to-end clean. So for instance, from my perspective, I may look at a lithium-ion battery, or for that matter, a fuel cell, right? Both of them use rare metals. Fuel cell, platinum and iridium, and lithium-ion is, and both have a very, very high carbon footprint. And one is that what is the kind of technology that you would like to go ahead and focus on? And that's where a lot of the research that Bjorn's doing is very, very relevant. Now to sort of quickly wrap up that socioeconomic perspective. It is proven, and you can bring in all sorts of data and statistics to prove it, but energy access and the ability of the people to go ahead and access high quality energy is critical for growth, and not just for economic growth, but for also socioeconomic growth. So there is an intergenerational ability for a household, for instance, to go ahead and make that leap into a better quality of life if you have access to clean energy and access to affordable energy and access to energy that is predictable, so that you can get 24 hours of power supply. A child can read if you have 24 hours power supply. Now that has a direct impact on the social capital that is generated. So I'll stop here for now, because I can go on.
But we will take up some of those threads a little later as well in the conversation. And so like it was mentioned earlier by Mr. Nimbarke, India has in fact made a commitment to reach a net zero goal by 2070. And Sweden is going to most likely reach this goal by 2045. There is a big difference, right? Could you throw some light on the Sweden journey so far? I mean, how has Sweden followed over the past few decades, followed up on its energy transition, both at a policy, research, and industry level to reach where we are today, Björn?
Oh, that's a...
It's a large question.
It's a large question. I mean, first of all, we have to realize that Sweden has a very fortunate starting position with having a large portion of hydropower, which helps us already from the beginning being very green. We have also, to our advantage, we have quite a big industry within steel, within the forest, and they have, I think, taken quite some steps, in particular within steel and on ore mining, to take steps to actually to take the lead. They have the ability to actually, they can afford this step, knowing that this will cost a lot now. It will take quite some time before we get some return on our investments. But we know from our past that we need to take those steps every now and then. Yeah. And that has, I think that is one key issue here. A good starting point, we have an industry which has a good financial backbone, so to say.
Right.
And we have a culture of thinking, being able to think quite long forward. I think that is important. And we also have, I think, a tradition of that the industry and the government are talking to each other. They are meeting in informal rooms and actually finding good solutions. And that is also, I think, a very important part of this.
That's true. That is crucial, and we refer to it in Seminar 1 as well, when we refer to the triple helix of industry, government, and academia, talking to one another, perhaps trying out pilot projects, perhaps failing fast, but perhaps being successful as well, right? Let's come to you, Professor Tor. An energy transition in legacy infrastructure is harder than starting afresh. And this is a problem that you tackle with day in and day out in built environments. You've studied energy transition in stock buildings extensively. Now, could you throw some light on what the policy here has been in Sweden and how it has kind of transformed into practice?
I'll try to do it in a few minutes. The building stocks stand for about 40% of the energy use in the society, and we know perfectly well how to build new buildings, extremely efficient, even buildings that produce over the year more energy than they use. But in order to meet the standards and goals set on a political level, we need to address the existing building stock. And we have a long history going back to the global energy crisis in the mid-1970s. And since then, Sweden has worked very ambitiously and I think effectively with improving energy performance in the building stock. Even so, there's still a lot that can be done and that we need to do. First thing, which I think is important if you look at the problem the overall problem is that improving energy performance is not an action that can be isolated from planning of maintenance and renovation. So it all has to be integrated. And therefore, the European Union has mandated that all member states should have a renovation strategy. And the renovation strategy aims to facilitate a highly energy efficient and decarbonized building stock by 2050. So I'm not going to go into details about Swedish goals and targets or European levels, but we have a very high level of ambition when it comes to these goals. But the question and the challenge is, how do we go from policy to practice? So the renovation strategy gives us the two first mandatory items are to get an overview of the national building stock, and to identify cost-efficient measures by building type and climate zone. So there's nothing new, and it's nothing new about improving energy performance, and it's not as exciting as working with renewable energy sources, but we need to keep grinding with that. And I don't know if I'd like to sort of exemplify this by using Visby as a background.
Please do.
Yes, yes. So if we move from the European to the national, to the local level, and look at the town of Visby. So then the question is, how can we reach or help to reach the national goals for in the area of climate change and energy? Well, it's about two things: doing things right and doing the right things. And the latter is where we have to begin. So we need to understand the building stock. We need to collect data. We need to integrate them into manageable databases. And if we do that, we can categorize the building stock into a number of categories with similar buildings. And for each category, we can define a typical building. And then we can start to have some engineering fun and try different scenarios and see what happens if we aim to reduce energy by 50% or by 20%, or if we want to introduce renewables, what are the consequences? And based on the results from sort of this in-depth analysis of the typical buildings, we can extrapolate this to say something about the building stock as a whole. Not only about the potential for energy saving and energy transition, but also defining packages of cost-efficient measures. So coming back to the theme of today's seminar, I think this is an area where there's really there should be opportunities for collaboration. It's about methods and approaches, because even though India has a very different building tradition and very different climates, I think the types of methods used to approach this problem are the same, and I think experiences from Sweden can be useful in India and vice versa.
That's very interesting to hear. And towards the end of the debate, perhaps we will take that question with all the panelists. But let me go to back to India with Mr. Nimbargi. Mr. Nimbargi, you spoke about the recent policy announcements and the policy changes in India towards accelerating energy transition. When we look at, you also mentioned something very interesting, which I would like to touch upon a little more. You did mention green hydrogen and the possibility of India being an exporter of green hydrogen. Now, this is a transformation game as far as India's energy efficiency goes. Could you elaborate on that a little, please?
Yeah, see, India could potentially get there. A lot of it is, in addition, dependent, apart from the RE cost, is the electrolyzer cost. Assuming that the way we have seen the cost coming down in terms of the solar panels with technology development and supply chain improving, similarly, we expect something to happen in the same space with respect to the electrolyzers on the production of hydrogen. And with that, we could couple it with the highly competitive RE cost in this country. So that will actually, help in terms of becoming India as a potential green hydrogen exporter. Of course, there are challenges in terms of transportation and other issues, but that will need to be tackled. Assuming on two counts. One is electrolyzers getting technologically efficient and competitive. And second, we should have innovation in terms of managing the transportation of hydrogen as a fuel, because one of the critical aspects is transportation of hydrogen for long distances. So that is something which we'll have to hope that we'll have some innovative solutions there. Assuming these two are coupled, the one ingredient that India has today is highly competitive RE costs and an increasing capacity that India would have in terms of RE capacity. So that will actually help in terms of producing the green hydrogen. The remaining part is dependent on the electrolyzer cost and technology and the transportation related costs. If these couple together, then we have that potential.
Is there an issue beyond that you all are also grappling with on green hydrogen?
Absolutely.
And would you like to kind of come in here?
I think you're completely right that India has a great opportunity. A key factor will be the access of cheap renewable energy, and I think you have the opportunity when it comes to large solar cell farms. It is true, as you say, that the transportation of hydrogen is a problem. It is such a small little thing, obviously. There are already ships going now from Australia to Japan, not with green hydrogen, but with grey hydrogen. But it is doable. And the fact that they can do this is because they have access to cheap energy in Australia. Can we have access to cheap renewable energy? I think this is absolutely a possibility. And when it comes to the electrolyzers, I mean, for the moment, we build them like exclusive sports car, more or less. They are built one by one. We will see a rapid development of an industrialization of this sector. So I think one person within this industry said that we expect a 10% decrease per year. I think he's wrong. It will be much faster. I mean, this is Moore's law, so it will happen, and it will be cheap. We see also some very interesting possibilities to a technological jump. So where we go from our 65% up to maybe 80-90% utilization. So that's it is an opportunity for you, I'm quite sure.
Right, and I know Mr. Nimbargi also has another engagement which we've kind of helped him back. But thank you so much, Mr. Nimbargi, for coming here and sharing your views. We would like to, of course, continue this conversation beyond. So perhaps we can build on this conversation. But thanks for that. I have another guest from India, Mr. Anirban Ghosh, the head of sustainability at Mahindra Group, is joining us. Welcome, Mr. Anirban Ghosh. It's good to see you here. We are at the island of Gotland in Visby at Almedalen Week. Mr. Anirban Ghosh, my question to you, bringing you into the debate, is that India is on a strong growth curve, and there's the need for all forms of energy to be available, and that's crucial as well. Now, how is the industry in India looking to balance the transition from fossil energy to carbon neutrality?
That's possibly the large part of climate action that industries are taking now.
Right.
But if I just break the emission problem down into three,
please go ahead.
Rather, the emission solution down into three. That is, first, get rid of emissions from electrical power generation and usage. Look at reducing emissions from burning fossil fuel and enhance circularity. There may be other levers to pull, but these are three big ones that will enable us to move towards becoming carbon neutral. And as industry, we realize that the adoption of renewable energy is critical as we move to reduce emissions from the consumption and generation of power. And if we want to be successful in adopting renewable energy, we must simultaneously adopt very large energy efficiency practices. And that's the first success story that industry is experiencing in India. At Mahindra, we've had a 74% increase in energy productivity in manufacturing automobiles on a baseline of 2009. Our operations are water positive, which also means that the requirement of energy to manage water has gone down sharply. And we are enabling similar actions in the supply chain. We're at about 40% renewable energy now. So if you take this whole package, you will see that the business has reduced emissions from the consumption of electrical power and is proceeding towards becoming 100% renewable energy, doubling energy productivity, if not more, and by these means, making sure that we manage electrical power emissions from electrical power consumption. But for an automobile manufacturing company and for industry in general, managing emissions from burning fossil fuel is very critical. You may be aware that we are the first to invest in electric mobility and are the largest manufacturer of electric three-wheelers at this point in time. There's a new EV being launched within this year, and the EV vision for how we are going about transforming from being an ICE company to being a EV company is to be launched within a month's time. Of course, even before EVs came along, we've been reducing vehicle weight to increase fuel efficiency consistently, reduce emissions as much as possible. So these are actions that industries are all taking, reducing the emissions from electrical energy, reducing emissions from burning fossil fuel. And in future, we realize that that for a net zero world, we have to ensure circularity at scale. And so we've invested in an automobile recycling business, increasing the recyclability of our vehicles, and are just about starting to use recycled material in the vehicles that we make.
Right.
If you go industry by industry, you'll hear some other success stories, but this is how Mahindra is approaching the journey to becoming net zero.
Right. This, of course, is very interesting to hear because we did earlier touch a little bit about transportation as well and energy efficiency in transportation. But Mr. Anirban Ghosh, I'm also going to ask you another question on if we zoom out a bit and we look at how can one collaborate when it comes to net zero, when it comes to an energy transition at scale. India and Sweden both are co-chairing the LEAD IT, or the leadership in industry transition, which is looking at a transition to net zero in hard-to-abate sectors. Could you throw some light on the progress made so far? And it would be interesting for our audience here in Sweden, considering that this the LEAD IT is being co-chaired by Sweden and India.
Yes,
and I know that Mahindra is also a part of it, and that's why I'm asking the question to you.
Yes, we are. Of course, I'll have to put on my industry hat to talk to you about hard-to-abate sectors because the Mahindra Group isn't in any one of them. The biggest progress that India has made in hard-to-abate sectors is probably in cement, where the program to enhance energy productivity has gone so well that today Indian cement manufacturers are among the most energy efficient in the world. We've had cement companies in India who've committed to being net neutral, adopted science-based targets, are doing pilots in CCUS, and have pretty much been in the forefront of the hard-to-abate sectors in trying to decarbonize as much as is possible. Of course, everyone, cement included and steel, is looking at the possibility of transitioning to the use of clean hydrogen. And I know that this is an area in which Sweden and India can collaborate because many steel manufacturers in Sweden have already taken the step forward in moving towards clean hydrogen. In an earlier LEAD IT conversation, I heard of a unit which is being either just set up or about to be set up, which is going to be using clean hydrogen in Sweden. And perhaps the biggest learning that I had from that conversation was every 15 odd years, when the blast furnace in a steel industry needs to be refurbished, this business from Sweden said instead of refurbishing the blast furnace, we are choosing to convert it to the clean hydrogen technology. So this is clearly an idea for collaboration. It will be something that will help the hard-to-abate sectors of both countries make progress together.
That's really interesting. I'm going to put green hydrogen and Bjorn. So we have with us Professor Bjorn from Uppsala University who's joining us. He's working on a pilot here on green hydrogen. Bjorn, any comments on this? And additionally, we'd like to hear about the project that's on Gotland as well.
If I first may say a little bit about the steel plants, which I've actually there are two steel plants. One is brand new, putting up a new, which is the first steel plant in Sweden for many years. The second one is the one of the existing steel plants that are rebuilding into a fossil-free steel manufacturing. It helps here, of course, that the steel they are producing is in the upper end of the steel segment, which helps. So they can actually, it's possible, the market can take a higher price. A learning from here, I think, is that you need to have the big projects, someone who takes the lead, because otherwise we end up with a hen and egg problem. What do we need first? In this case, the steel plants, they are will be both the producers of the hydrogen and the user of the hydrogen. So that's quite nice. If we should say a few words about the hydrogen project here on the island, which is that there is a ferry. You know, we are on an island, so we need a ferry, a big ferry to take us to mainland. This ferry is today mainly driven by natural gas, which is better than having standard oil. Now we are in the process of defining how can we operate this ferry, taking 1,900 passengers, 200 meters long, based on hydrogen. And we are in the beginning of a research project. In parallel, there is also an industry project. So they're going to actually build this ship, which is very interesting, very nice. Within 8 years, this boat will sail. But what we have seen so far is that, yes, hydrogen, even in compressed phase, we do not need hydrogen in as a liquid, which is a little bit tricky. It is doable with lots of energy. Running the ferry in a very high speed, quite a long distance. It opens up very interesting opportunities for the maritime sector. It opens up for, this is a good example. We can actually do this. And again, with the good example, I would really say thank you to the company who is running this, that they actually dare to take this step.
So that actually brings me to my next question, and then perhaps I'll take about 5 minutes to and open up the floor in case someone else has a question. But how does one finance this transition? And that's a question which is debated the world over. It is debated at the various COPs, at COP26, and this is something which has different perspectives, has a commitment, but the commitments are not really being realized. Swami, if I can throw this question your way. Now, when it comes to the question of financing a transition, say institutions like the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, these have been created to actually improve and track and report climate-related financial information and draw matrices out from that, right? Now, I don't want to get into those details, it does get technical, but very simply put, where's the money going to come from to change the nuts and bolts? Would you like to take a crack at that?
So let me take a crack at that, and this is something that we've been grappling with for some time, and I wear the double hats of a researcher and a teacher, and that of being a consultant looking at strategy and business design. And one of the key questions that we end up engaging with a lot of our clients, groups like Mahindra, for instance, or some of the agrichem companies, or cement companies, is the fact that at some point or the other, they do realize that the business model itself needs to change. if one has to go ahead and actually start building the transitions or micro transitions, as we call it, into each part of their value chain. And ultimately, it then boils down to the fact that how do you start using a process-based system model wherein you're able to identify what is the true cost of an input, how does the throughput really take place, and what is the true cost of an output? How does that get factored in? So this then harks back to my first point that I made, saying that how do you go ahead and redesign the system from the point of view of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and also from the point of view of identifying the correct risks. And I think Anirban was mentioning about circularity, but it's also very critical. I think the ambassador was also mentioning of the World Economic Forum. And there are quite a few initiatives wherein there is a thought saying that can we move from revenue accounting to value accounting? And when you say that you want to move from revenue accounting to value accounting, you have to go ahead and start thinking about risk matrices or risk frameworks from a perspective wherein newer risks are taken into account. And organizations like TCFD, for instance, go ahead and say that can you identify what are the physical risks, what are the transition risks, what are the climate risks. And these are new forms of risks that typical financial institutions, say 10 years back or 15 years back, would not consider. So the key point for me that still needs to be worked out from a detailed perspective is that sooner than later, the financing would be made available. But at some point or the other, the financing needs to go ahead and connect to some of the specific requirements of regional context and country context. And if I have to go ahead and drill it down to the India level, it's also about the fact that India needs energy to grow. And as I clearly said earlier, there are numerous studies, I will not throw statistics here, which indicate that the quality of life of people intergenerationally improves only when they have access to high quality energy.
Right.
So that's the way in which I think the whole systemic picture needs to change. It's easy to talk about transformation, and it appears all big and rosy and nice and fluffy, but it's also necessary to get down to the ground level and start talking about some of the details of how are you going to do the transition, who's going to do the transition, how does equity get hard-coded into it, how do you take into account some of the specific requirements of some of the countries which are growing at a fast pace and are critical for going ahead and maintaining the world order. So these are some of the questions that would need to be taken into account.
Right. Does anyone want to take a crack at it to sort of talk about the financing, or can I throw it open to the audience? Anirban?
A couple of comments, yeah.
All right.
You know, given the journey we're on, where solutions get conceived, they get developed, gradually they become economically feasible, and then they scale. We need lots of solutions to go through this entire cycle. And in this whole cycle, we will actually access funds from multiple sources. The sources currently exist, so there is a research ecosystem. And for instance, the ship that's going to run on hydrogen, there will be money coming in, essentially grant funds will be required in some form to make sure that the solution can be made properly. The whole research can happen, the experiments can happen, the pilots can happen. And as this moves into a realm where it is becoming economically feasible, I guess we've already seen how the venture capital and the private equity funds have started coming in for climate technologies. And then as it becomes more and more economically feasible, we'll see private sector funding, we'll see the government coming in to scale up adoption like India did for LEDs and Germany did for solar panels and so on. So right through the chain of development of the technology, we will have to tap into different kinds of funding and different sources of funding, because that's the most appropriate way to go about it.
Right. All right, we're going to open it up for questions. In case anyone has, quickly raise your hands. Otherwise, we're going to have a wrap-up session as well. So, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sigurdur Andersson, and I'm the spokesperson for the Green students here in Sweden.
Okay.
Yeah, because you were talking about the energy transition here in Sweden and in India, and I think you also mentioned it, but perhaps Sweden has an easier way to go, not as like far ahead. But when we are talking about our transition here in Sweden, how can we think, when we think about like policies and measures we take to facilitate for India? And I think you have touched upon that, but more clearly, do you in the panel have like thoughts upon that? That our like measures here do not just stay here, that we reach, I don't know, carbon neutrality in that year. How can we make that spread into the rest of the world?
Okay, so very quickly, both Bjorn and Swami, maybe Bjorn first. Yeah.
Yes, we must. The easy answer is that we should be the good example. Hands-on, if we look upon the maritime sector, which is by default is an international sector. Here it's important that the IMO, which is the International Maritime Organization, actually takes steps forward. Within Europe, we're introducing the ETS system, that it actually should cost you something to pollute. We need international agreements. That is absolutely necessary. Although I think we shall not stop ourselves by saying that, hey, today there are no international agreements. We have to take one step in advance, I think. It's important.
Swami?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question, and there are two parts to it, at least from how I look at it. One is that, I think Sweden took a great step forward on April 7th of this year, when it became the first country in the world to sign up for what is called as the consumption-based emissions accounting. And there's a critical difference between territorial production-based emissions accounting and consumption-based accounting, which means that it is also showing the way, saying that we Swedes have to take responsibility for the carbon footprint that we generate, and we import into it. So you can't stay behind and say that that's being produced somewhere else, and I'll start accounting for the emissions only when it lands into our shores. So I think that's a good way forward. The second way forward is that I think Sweden as a country itself has something to offer to the world. And it also means that it needs to put itself out in the world as an independent voice in many ways, so that it's able to go ahead and showcase its model to other countries. It could be the social welfare model, it could be the social democracy model, it could be the way the people have come together to create certain kinds of institutions, right? Including something as simple as Bostadrat, which is a fantastic way of going ahead and saying that how do you manage a building? Because it's also a way of managing a building and repurposing a building and keeping it up and running, right? That also means that Sweden needs to be open enough to go ahead and engage with the rest of the world, with other countries, and have that openness and the clarity of thought to accommodate different points of view and understand where are different people coming from, where are different countries coming from, what are their specific requirements, and how do different countries look at fulfilling their people's requirements depending on the context in which they are in. So just
so interesting, you were talking about community and perspective, both. But Tor, you wanted to say something.
Yes, coming back to your question, in 1981, I was also a young green student, and I traveled to India to learn more about solar energy. And I and my colleague came back very humble, because our Indian colleagues were way ahead of us. So there's another question, what can we learn from India? And I'm not going to try to answer that question, but I've already said I think methods and work processes are transferable. But more generally, I think what's needed is to facilitate matchmaking and to find the nucleation points where it starts boiling, where things happen. And I think this is something can be done quite easily. We just need to open a few doors, and I think this type of seminar is the first step towards that.
Well, thank you, Tor. And of course, we need more nodes of connection if I can bring in the energy aspect of it. But Anirban, last words, something you want to say on this seminar on how we can collaborate between India and Sweden?
You know, when we look at conversations between developed nations and developing nations in the area of climate, one refrain from developing nations has always been that, yes, we would like to take climate action, but please help us with technology and please help us with money.
Yes.
We've already discussed money. And I've always believed that when technology arrives, it will travel. And what is very hopeful is that many technologies are not only coming forward, but are becoming economically feasible. Uh, there's a whole list of them. And some of them we are not yet done with. We think we are done with renewable energy. We are not. We should see newer, more effective technologies in converting solar power to energy. In a similar vein, today, lithium ion is propelling us forward. But I think we will see many, many more technologies in battery chemistry, in battery materials, in battery terminals, and so on. And we've all talked about clean hydrogen making a transformation in hard-to-abate sectors, and Sweden is already ahead in that space. The pilots are happening. And more and more, we see these technologies evolving. The best place for collaboration is to see that these technologies travel, that they are not just adopted in their country of origin, but because they're effective, they end up being adopted by many countries around the world, both developed and developing, because every gram of carbon dioxide emitted into the air is bad for the entire world. So wherever we are able to cut it off, the better it is. And to my mind, that is the best form of collaboration we can possibly have. We've had examples of that already. It's happening in electric mobility today. And I hope there are many, many more areas where countries around the world are able to help new climate technologies travel across the world for us to be able to win the climate game.
Well, thank you, Anirban Ghosh. You've summed up the seminar and very, very interesting last few words, which we will take away with us. Thank you so much, Tor, Bjorn, and Swaminathan for joining us. I would now like to call Professor Emeritus Uwe Ronstrom to wrap up the session. Look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thanks, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This session has at least taught me, or it comes to my mind that energy is not just any kind of commodity. It's not just one other commodity. It's always, as Anirban Ghosh said, it's always mobile. It's always on the move. It's fluent, and it's always would be more process than product. We need to think about energies on the move, which means that energy production and distribution and access, as Mr. Lal and the ambassador here reminded us in the beginning, and the costs, the innovations, it's reducing the consumption and hiring the efficiency will be global issues and not national issues. They will need to be global issues. The system perspective that you introduced need to be huge systems. But then also we need to remind, we were reminded by several of the speakers here that these systems, whether they are super global or like big motorways that travels around the world and connects us in different ways, they also need to be very, very local. And what is I think the most crucial thing, these systems, we tend to think of systems as something in the singular or something but we need to think of them as diverse as they can be, because we hear here about solutions from a company, from a private company that are taking the head of the lead on this and in this transition that we are heading into. And we also hear from our colleagues here about intellectuals, academic, like myself, that are taking the lead in there. So the industry and the universities and of course the states must then join to, as I see it, to build systems that can cope with the diversity of the solutions. And that would be the great adventure of our time, to stay with the diversity and build. Why? Because as so many of you also hinted at or spoke openly about, the main idea would not be to have enough energy only. The main idea would be have enough clean and affordable energy so that we can build societies with enough health, equity, education, food. So that means that energy will be something in itself, for itself, that we need to build energy systems for them, because it's an end in itself. But then it's also an instrument. We need to think of it as an instrument for all the other sectors of life. So, and we need to stay mobile, open, and diverse. That was my take from this.
Thank you, Professor Owe. That was a very, very interesting take as well on bringing together energy, diversity, access, as well as different aspects of technology and innovation also. So I would like to thank you all once again for joining us on the second seminar at Engaging India in Almedalen. And as Professor Tor said, that let's continue this conversation, let's talk more, let's engage more, and let's build a better society for all of us. Thank you.